Honored guests, the groundbreaking of this center could not be more timely. It comes at a moment when the world needs to hear Africa's story told in its own voice from our own perspective. Today's groundbreaking is a milestone that fulfills the dreams and aspirations of many Africans, across many generations, and honors all of those whose shoulders we stand on at this point. We must call upon the courage of those who journeyed long before us, long before many of us were born. It's their stories and others that we must tell. This is the embodiment of a life dedicated to the service of Africa and humanity. It is a physical manifestation of the African Renaissance. It is therefore my singular honor to invite the patron of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, President Thabo Mbeki, to give a few remarks, not long, just a few remarks, Mr. President.
How long is long? Thanks a lot, Lucanio. A few remarks. I was just asking him, how many minutes is a few remarks? He did not explain. Maybe I think about 22, 23 years ago, we paid a state visit to Mali. At that time, the president of Mali was a very good gentleman, Alpha Omar Konare. And so before we left, President Konare sent a number of messages and said, please include the Minister of Sports in your delegation. We didn't understand why, but he insisted on it. Include the Minister of Sports in your delegation, which we did. It was Ngonde Balfour at the time. So we went to Mali, and then we sit in this bilateral meeting between the two delegations. And President Konare says, now, President Mbeki, you know, this was around November of that year. And he says, you know, in January, 2 months' time, Mali is hosting this Africa Cup of Nations. So I said, yes, President, I know that. And then he says, we've built the stadia ready. No problem. Yes, President. Now there's a problem. One of the problems is that Mali does not have enough telephone lines. So by the time the tournament takes place in 2 months' time, there must be enough telephone lines, because the numbers of people are going to come from the whole continent and the world for this cup. Yes, President. And then we've got buses to carry the players from wherever they go. But we don't have the private cars, the sedans, to carry the officials. Yes, President. And then the health infrastructure. It says the health infrastructure of Mali cannot cope with the numbers of people who will come, including attending to such injuries as players are playing. Now, he says, now you, he's saying, pointing at me, he says, now you are the one who's been talking about an African Renaissance. Now, you cannot have an Africa, a Renaissance Africa, which can't host a soccer tournament. Because this soccer tournament is going to need the sedans, it's going to need the telephone lines, and it's going to need a health process. And it's your job. President, no, it's your responsibility. And it was insisted on it. So we had to put in all of that other infrastructure. And in the Soccer Cup, Africa Soccer Cup, the 2023, I think it was, took place successfully. The reason I'm telling that story is it was the attitude of let me tell another part of the story about Mali. So we visit Timbuktu because we're very interested to see the Ahmed Baba Library, which has got all of this literature from that old university in Timbuktu. So we went there. And the Ahmed Baba Library was one room, a long room. And there's tables in the middle, shelves. So you had the manuscripts on these shelves, manuscripts on the table. These are 1,000 years old, 800 years old. And it's called the Ahmed Baba Library. We had an SABC cameraman who was carrying his camera and as we were walking around. And then he puts the camera down. And he comes up to me and says, President, you must do something. So I said, do what? Yeah, but President, you can't, this is Ahmed Baba Live, you can't, you must do something. And then he picks up his camera. So when we went back to Bamako, I said to President Konari, no, this is what our cameraman said. We have to do something about that library. And then he says, you know that Mali is poor. I said, of course, President, I know that. So let's reach an agreement. I commit myself to supply the water, clean water, to people living in the villages of Mali. Because we are poor, they need that. You take responsibility for the library. So that was our deal. So those are two things we did. We made sure that the Soccer World Cup succeeds, the Africa Cup, and we built the library at Timbuktu. I'm really telling that story to say something about the attitude of the rest of the continent towards this country. Because President Konare was not asking this, he was not really asking. He was telling us what to do. That's your responsibility as South Africa to make sure that we succeed with regard to all of these things. I'm saying that because we see that phenomenon today. This library center, look, as I'm sure all of us have known this by now, that the library has already got Kwame Nkrumah's archive. That archive should have gone to London. But people from Ghana intervened and said, no, you can't take Kwame Nkrumah's material to England. It must stay on Africa. And then they came to tell us that there is this thing, and can we talk to the people who were looking after that archive to see whether it can come here. We talked to them, and they readily said, if it's you asking for it, here it is. President Kaunda's children came to us and said, we as a family are saying the Kaunda archive belongs here. John Garang, who was leader of the SPLM in South Sudan, the people who were holding his archive contacted the foundation, said they can come and collect John Garang's. The rest of the continent is treating this library as their property. They own it. It's the same with Julius Nyerere, doing access to Julius Nyerere's material and so on. Again, it's the same attitude. The rest of the continent says this is common possession of ours as Africans. So I'm very, very glad indeed that today we're meeting as we're doing to do this sword turning. Because I think together we're making a statement about the future of our continent. And it's a very good statement and really very, very inspiring. You know, when Comrade Mayor, never mind Johannesburg, they just look at South Africa. the troubles we're in this country. But once you forget about these troubles of the continent, of the country and city and all that, and think about this, you forget all these troubles. Because here is something that is positive, that we as South Africans are doing, we the rest of the continent are doing, about the future of our continent, which also needs a lot of thinking. We're going to Mali. The government of Mali have said, can you come? Because they want to say thank you for what we did. So we're going to Mali. We're going to Burkina Faso because Thomas Sankara, when he was killed, was murdered there many years ago. And the current government has set up a monument to Thomas Sankara and are trying to rebuild Burkina Faso in terms of that, inspired by the thinking of Sankara. And they invited us to come to that ceremony. So a delegation led by Max Bokwana went there because the Burkinabe are saying, please come, let's sit together to discuss what do we do about Burkina Faso. We are currently discussing Madagascar. I think you'd have seen a little bit on the media. There's a lot of commotion in Madagascar. And again, so the people from Madagascar said, can't you see there's something going wrong and you are doing nothing? So we'll do something about Madagascar. And all I'm trying to say is really thank you very much indeed for coming and for making this commitment. We should never, ever forget our responsibility towards the rest of the continent. And the rest of the continent insists. They don't ask as we are requesting you. No, this is your responsibility. I think it's a great honor that the African continent plays that kind of tribute to us as South Africans. But thanks a lot. I think, Lucanio, that those are a few words. But thanks for coming.